5 3 9 7 1 5.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Bigfoot for Breakfast, home of the mysterious and the macabre, where we sit in the studio week after week, challenging conventional thought. We are your hosts,
Sarah Jones
and Samantha Carter. Thank you for joining us. We're really pleased that you've come. Have a seat. As per usual, please don't forget to go into whatever podcast app that you listen from and press the subscribe button so you can be updated every week when we post a new episode. And if you get a little bit of time and you feel so compelled, please help us out by leaving a rating and a review for us on that podcast app as well. This really helps out the show, and it helps us out to know what you think, because for real, we want to know what you think.
We are also always open to any suggestions about the show, or if you have an idea for a topic that we should cover, or if you just want to tell us a weird story. There are various ways you can contact us. You can always shoot us an email at bigfootforbreakfast@outlook.com, send us a message on Facebook or Twitter, or you can actually call us and leave a message. It is, in fact, a message number only, so for all you introverts out there who don't want to speak to a real person, have no fear. You can reach this voicemail box at 641-812-2635, and we'll play your message on the air. So we encourage you to do this because it is very pleasing to us.
Call us and let's get weird. Very soon, we will be announcing our March contest, in which you will be able to enter to win a free something. Something, likely a Bigfoot for Breakfast t-shirt or a tumbler. We're open to suggestions as far as other things that we should make, so if you have any of those suggestions, let us know. T-shirts and tumblers have been kind of the most popular suggestions thus far, so we have pretty much kind of just stuck with that. Either way, we give away free things every month, so keep an eye out on Facebook for that announcement, as well as Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. If you haven't become friends with us on any of those social media platforms yet, please do, because that's typically how we make the contest announcements. They're pretty easy to win, plus, who doesn't like free stuff? We also want to take a few minutes to let you in on some recommendations that we have for some other shows. We know a few that may pique your interest. The Question Everything guys, Semperfi Rob, Sean, and the Mick host a show where they pick a different topic every week that usually seems to coincide with issues that we seem to be facing at the time as American people, and they discuss it. They usually do a Facebook Live every Saturday, and then they'll post the edited version to the podcast platforms a few days later. They also take call-ins from guests who have anything to say regarding the topic that week. So if you can relate in some way or have an opinion, get on their Facebook Live and give them a call and chat them up for a while.
MWP is another show that you guys should check out. Chach and Josh are funny, and their conversations flow really well. They talk a lot about movies, wrestling, politics, whatever else comes up through the episode, with a lot of jokes and a lot of great personality. So check them out. You won't regret it.
The Kensington Corner with Tom and Jeff is another great show. They tackle the problems of the world one thing at a time, but they focus a lot on health and overall well-being, both mentally and physically, from a man's standpoint. And we found their show to be really interesting because they aren't afraid to really get into the everyday struggles that guys face, especially with mental health and stress. It's a really honest show, and one of them is a veteran, so they promote various causes associated with the mental health of veterans as well, which we think is incredible because it's a very important topic and our nation's veterans don't get the love and support that they deserve. Any conversation that can be had about how to improve that is fantastic.
Moving on to the story at hand. We've got a good one for you guys today. It's been a pretty popular tale among the UFO enthusiasts over the years, and much like a few of our other topics that we've covered, we really have been wondering whether or not we should cover this one due to its popularity in the past, and we've been wondering about whether or not this story has already been told too much. But we find ourselves surprised pretty often when it comes to things like this, things that we feel that everyone has already heard about, and we get a lot of feedback that make it seem that this may be not so. Either way, this is seriously such a crazy story, and we are really excited to share it with you guys. This is honestly one of my favorite. I guess if I have to have a favorite UFO abduction story, this one's easily probably like the most well documented. And if there ever was one that I feel like really happened, it would be this one. It's a scary story. It's scary.
Getting into my storytelling mode.
Yep. Get comfy, Sam, over there.
One evening. I don't feel like I'm saying well.
One evening.
There you go.
One evening, 6 men came speeding down the road coming off the mountain into the little town of Lieber, Arizona. The men were upset, some crying, disheveled, and unnerved. The men had come down the mountain in an unplanned manner. They were missing one, and they had a hell of a terrible story to tell.
This is one of the best, most well-documented UFO encounters in American history, and there are several eyewitnesses to corroborate it, along with other pretty compelling evidence that it did happen. So with that in mind, we've decided to bring to you the insane case of the Travis Walton UFO abduction story.
Travis was a regular guy. It seems like he was about as regular as a person gets, really. He is from Snowflake, Arizona, which is an oxymoron.
It's Maricopa County.
I love Maricopa County.
I know, that's why I thought it was so weird that it was like Snowflake in Maricopa County.
Right?
You don't want to be one of those there. That sheriff is a hard ass.
Yes, he is.
Is it still the same sheriff?
I don't know if Sheriff Joe's still there.
I don't either. I know when he was there, he held shit down.
I'm a big fan of the chain gang.
Yeah, he was something. Anyway.
And the bologna was green.
Ew, really?
Mm-hmm. No
like
one knows
moldy
why.
green?
No, no one knows why.
Did he make it green?
I don't know.
Or is all of the bologna in Maricopa County green?
I don't know.
That's some questionable shit.
In the prison.
That sounds like a podcast episode.
Why is it green?
It sounds odd and macabre.
Anyway, in an interview that Travis did with the Hannibal TV, I always want to say the YouTube.
We'll do it.
Hit it on the YouTube. He spoke a little bit about his younger years and being interested in participating in sports such as martial arts and boxing. He rode motorcycles, and although he denies ever having any real interest in the UFO phenomenon, he tells the interviewer that he took some astronomy classes in college, but that was about as far as it went. He had always held the belief that we likely weren't alone in the universe, but the thought never seemed to preoccupy him to any extent. He had a pilot's license, and when he became an adult, he had gotten into the foresting industry.
So I think it's important to point out that he didn't have some weird obsession with this prior to it happening. He just had kind of a normal belief, I guess. I don't know. He worked for a guy named Mike Rogers who ran a small crew, and Mike would bid government contracts to thin out trees. At the end of the contract, everyone would get paid. The contract that they were working at the time was the best contract that Mike had ever gotten, according to Travis.
On November 5th, 1975, they were working in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest just outside of town. In this area, the government wanted to encourage healthy growth of wanted trees in the area. The guys would go into a forested area and thin out the trees that were inhibiting the growth of the others. It's hard and pretty dangerous work, and Travis was actually a trained emergency medical technician. So I'm sure that this training came in handy more than a handful of times during his employment in this field, in this forest.
In the interview for Hannibal TV, Travis states that he was with 6 other guys on this crew and that they really didn't seem to have much in common, and that they weren't really friends outside of work. They weren't the type of guys that would go out for beers when they were done logging trees. It seems to be a relationship in which they just kind of went in, got the workday over with, and went home. They weren't buddies and they weren't close. Actually, I think the more I read into this, it does sound like he and Mike were originally friends and had known each other for a really long time. And he got hired on with Mike, and then the rest of them were just kind of hired hands that they didn't know beforehand. The other 6 members of the crew were the guy we mentioned earlier, the boss, Mike Rogers, and also Alan Dallas, John Goulet, Kenny Peterson, Steve Pierce, and Dwayne Smith. In fact, one of the guys, Alan Dallas, had just been in an altercation with Travis because he was trying to move in on Travis's girlfriend. She had told Travis, and the two of them got into a scuffle the next day before work behind the house of the boss, Mike. They all ended up going on to work after this, but Travis states that the two of them still felt a lot of resentment on the work site, and at some point, directly after it happened, Alan actually dropped a tree on Travis while they were working in the forest. Travis had always felt that Alan did this on purpose. This event will come into play in a big way later on in the story.
On the day in question, the men finished up their work in the forest and were heading home all together in a big work truck with Mike behind the wheel, all wide awake and ready to get home. While driving home, the men noticed a strange glow off in the distance to the right of the road that seemed to be hovering on the horizon. All of the men had seen it, and a brief conversation took place about what it could be. Although it did seem somewhat strange, they didn't feel remarkably interested in what it was. They debated for a time about whether it might be a fire or even maybe a plane crash, noting that the sun had set a short time ago, so it wasn't that. It wasn't moving. It could have been any number of things out there, so at first it wasn't a big deal.
As they drove on, they soon realized that it was a more remarkable sight than they thought. They got closer and closer, and soon the men realized that this was actually some sort of hovering aircraft. There are descriptions of this craft out there that make it seem that they got incredibly close to it. It was described as having been hovering about 20 feet off the ground just under the tops of the trees as they approached it with their vehicle. They stared at it in complete shock for what seemed like forever. On TravisWalton.com, there is an excerpt from Travis's book, Fire in the Sky, in which he describes the craft.
The flattened disc, flattened.
Say flat.
The flat disc, flying pancake. The flattened disc had a shape like that of two gigantic pie pans placed lip to lip, with a small round bowl turned upside down on the top. Barely visible at our angle of sight, the white dome peeked over the upper outline of the ship. We could see the darker stripes of a dull silver sheen that divided the glowing areas into panel-like sections. The dim yellowish light given off by the surface had the luster of hot metal, fresh from a blast furnace. There were no visible antennae or protrusions of any kind. Nothing that resembled a hatch, ports, or window-like structures could be seen, and there was no motion or sound from the craft. It almost appeared to be dead in the air.
Travis describes the craft in an interview later as sort of a metallic with soft glowing lights that seemed to be broken up by darker areas and lit up the whole area that surrounded it, making everything look really weird. Weird. It was about 40 feet across when the view became increasingly clear. One of the guys confirmed what it seemed that all of them were thinking, that it was a, quote, flying saucer.
Flying pie pan.
Pancake.
Uncle Jemima's pure sour mash liquor. Pancakes is ready. As the truck slowed to a crawl, Travis flung open his door, thinking that the aircraft was going to speed off at any time, and he wanted to get a good look at it before it did. It hadn't really crossed his mind that anything would happen to him, and he wasn't really scared of it. He walked slowly, closer and closer to it, as it hovered above the ground, and his friends yelled, well, they weren't really his friends, his coworkers. I don't want to imply a relationship that wasn't there. His coworkers yelled frantically from the pickup truck for him to get back in. He was less than 100 feet away from the aircraft, and it was still hovering in the air, quiet as can be. He undoubtedly got a very good look at it. It was a flying saucer. He could see the creatures inside. He could see their eyes. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. He admits that he was kind of showing off at this point. They were yelling and scared, and he thought it would make him look really cool and brave to walk right up to it.
There's a lot of people that criticize Travis Walton for walking up to a UFO.
How do you not?
Like in the Midwest, how when there's a tornado warning, there's hardly anyone that doesn't go outside on their front porch.
You know, they say, take shelter in your basement. Where are you? Front porch.
Yep, the kids are in the basement.
You're running to the front porch.
I remember the last time.
And an American flag.
Shotgun, bottle of whiskey, and an American flag. That's the Midwest
We're
for you.
going green.
I remember the last time, remember when a tornado really did hit us?
Yeah, I was standing out in the front yard.
So was I. And my kids were literally screaming. I could hear them from the basement, Mom, come in the house. And I'm like, I'm coming. For real. Well, legit. Anywho, bottle of whiskey and the American flag.
You like that?
Yeah, it was good. The more the men hollered, though, the more alarmed they sounded. He started to realize that he probably should go back to the truck.
Must go faster.
He could feel himself becoming anxious and scared, but at this point he didn't want to be embarrassed after he had come this far. Think about it. A bunch of loggers watching him run scared from something that he saw in the woods. He would probably really never live it down.
In his defense, though, they sounded way more scared than he was.
It sounded like they were actually pretty frightened. They didn't really understand why he was doing what he did, but he wanted to touch it.
I'd want to touch it.
Don't touch the butt.
Let's poke it with a stick.
The craft suddenly became louder, and it began to move. So Travis quickly ducked behind a nearby log pile, and he got into a crouching position facing the craft. He could hear his friends yelling even louder from the pickup for him to get back in the truck. That's when he resolved to do that, and he suddenly stood up and bolted back for the truck, but he didn't get more than a couple of feet before he saw a bright bluish-green flash and simultaneously felt a numbing shock jolt through his entire body. The beam of light didn't make a sound as it shot out of the ship, but while it was seemingly electrocuting him, it made an eerie popping noise. And just as quickly as it hit him, he felt himself hit the ground hard. And then for a while, nothing.
His coworkers described this moment a bit differently from their point of view. When Travis stood to run back to the safety of the pickup, they immediately saw a beam of light about a foot wide shoot out of the craft, lifting Travis into the air a few feet with his back arched and his arms and legs completely outstretched, and then throw Travis across the clearing like a sack of meat. Quote.
Yeah, that's not ours.
That's a direct quote. Like a sack of meat. At this moment, one of his coworkers, Steve, yelled, "It got him!" The velocity at which he was thrown and the way Travis looked when he landed made his coworkers believe that he was dead. The men would state later that it was like seeing someone step on a landmine or a grenade going off. It was so powerful and he landed so hard. There was no way he could be alive. The men, yelling in terror and leaving Travis behind, sped off down the road as fast as their logging truck would go. There was no saving Travis, and they needed to get away from this thing before it killed all of them.
I have to make mention here, too. I had mentioned earlier that Travis wrote a book called Fire in the Sky, and later we'll kind of talk about it, but there's a movie of the same name. It's pretty popular, really. A lot of people have probably seen it. It was made in 1993. Travis says that there's a lot of inconsistencies in the movie. It's mostly kind of the right story, but they changed a lot of small things. Like when he's thrown across the clearing, it kind of looks like he's just tossed slightly. But his friends and Travis all completely disagree with that portrayal. He was thrown hard across the clearing. They all said they instantly just knew he was dead just by the way he hit the ground. And I think in the movie, there were 5 loggers. For some reason, they changed the number of them. They just took out 2 of them. Okay, so the men got down to the bottom of the hill and stopped the truck. Part of them wanted to go back and get Travis, feeling like they shouldn't leave him up there like that, Mike included. The other part of the group didn't think they should go back up there alone and that they should go for help first. Mike told the guys that he was going back up the mountain to get Travis. If anyone didn't want to go with him, they could wait at the bottom of the hill on the road and he would pick them up on the way back to town. But all of them were already feeling a little embarrassed about getting so scared and leaving Travis behind in the first place. And none of the guys really wanted to stand around in the middle of nowhere by themselves, so they all stayed in the truck and went back up the mountain together. As they were driving back up, they saw the aircraft leaving the area, off into the night sky. They all fully anticipated that Travis would be there, and the men were scared to death of what they were going to find when they got back to that spot, and what kind of state in which they would find Travis. They anticipated that he would be dead. There was no doubt. By the way he was thrown around, there was no way he would be okay. They expected Travis to be a mangled mess, and none of them were ready to see something like that. But either way, they couldn't leave him behind. I also want to apologize for my raspiness in my voice, because I have a cold. Again.
Coronavirus.
It's not. I don't think. I don't know.
Let's join the hysteria.
I don't have any masks.
I don't want to be here.
You don't?
Well, I don't want coronavirus.
Oh, well.
Please wash your hands. You should be already doing this. It's not new.
We were talking about that on the news the other day. They were giving all the ways you can avoid the coronavirus. And I was like, these are common sense every day. Wash your hands anyway.
All the time.
Wash them. Don't be an asshole.
Walmart's been providing wipes for their shopping cart handles for years.
They have.
Use them. Stop buying all the toilet paper. Save some for the rest of us.
Are they?
Oh my gosh, yes. Selling out. And I was reading where hand sanitizer was selling on eBay for like $500 a bottle.
Why are people buying so much toilet paper?
No, they're anticipating quarantine. So everybody's just buying all the toilet paper.
I accidentally subscribed and saved to like way too much toilet paper on Amazon for about a year, and I kept forgetting to cancel it. So my bathroom closet, it looks like a grocery store inventory amount of toilet paper. So I'm good.
First rule of stockpiling is you never let people know what you have.
Well, they only know about toilet paper.
Do you want to die for your toilet paper? Because literally, people will kill you to steal your stuff.
If you come to my house during a martial law situation in the world,
you're gonna die.
You just ask me for toilet paper. You don't have to. I'll throw it at you from the porch. I'll give you some. We can share. You don't need to do all that. It doesn't have to get that Western.
Please, sir, I want some more.
I'll toilet paper you.
Here's the thing. When they got back, they pulled into the site slowly, shining their headlights over the area. They looked over it carefully, calling out his name, hearing only silence. Mike was becoming emotional and overwhelmed with fear and guilt at having left and then lost his friend. He was supposed to be running the show in this crew and felt responsible for them. They didn't see what state Travis was in because they were unrecovering successful his body. They didn't see what state Travis was in, and they were unsuccessful in recovering his body because he wasn't there. Travis was gone. He just disappeared.
The guys decided that they would be of better use heading down the mountain and trying to get help in town. They unanimously resolved to get the cops and tell them what had happened that night. As unbelievable as it sounded, they had to tell them.
As for Travis, his first memories after feeling the initial jolt, as he called it, were those of a bright light in his eyes and lots of burning pain. Not only that, but he just felt that there was something terribly wrong inside of him. He felt thirsty and kept tasting metal in his mouth. He remembers thinking that maybe he had been injured on the job site and that the crew had taken him to the hospital. But he couldn't see anything, except for the blurry, faint glow of a light directly above him. He could only hear people moving about around him, and he took this movement to be that of hospital staff. He felt incredibly weak and felt like he was unable to move. As if he tried to exert any energy, he would just lapse right back into his previously unconscious state. He got his eyes open, and as they began to focus, he saw the movement he was hearing was not the sound of doctors and nurses at work, as he originally suspected, but it was something, or some things, creatures of some sort.
Travis goes on to describe them as hairless and short, delicate-looking with big eyes. Their noses were small, with tiny oval nostrils, and they were thin-lipped with narrow mouths that he never saw open. Their skin was sort of a grayish-white with the texture of a marshmallow. They were wearing what appeared to be loose-fitting brown-orange colored suede coveralls. Their faces looked almost like that of infants, underdeveloped in a way. Travis was hysterical. He had no idea what had happened, and he didn't know where he was. He had never seen creatures like this or a place like this. He noticed a table beside him, and he grabbed a tool off of it, taking a swing at the creatures. The creatures were too far away from him, and he didn't make contact. They didn't really seem to react to his aggression and fear. They just sort of stood there looking at him with intense curiosity. His general weakness prevented him from getting up off the table to continue his fight. The whole time, he states that the creatures never made a sound at all. They were completely silent and didn't seem to be communicating even with each other.
Even though Travis was weak, he remembers that the room was very small and triangular. There was a door on the other side of the beings that he wanted desperately to go to. He was lying on a table in the middle of the room that was held up by a single leg. He felt he couldn't breathe. He couldn't get any air. The air was heavy and humid. The room was smooth, as if it was all made out of the same material. The floor, the walls, the table, everything.
Suddenly, the creatures scurried out of the room, turning a corner to the right. Shaking uncontrollably, Travis found the strength to get up off the table and ran out of the room as well, through the same door, except while the creatures ran to the right, he was running to the left. He ran around trying to find a way out of the craft, thinking that he could get out of a door and back into the woods. As he ran down the hall, he noticed that there was a room off to the right, so he went in thinking that there might be an exit off the ship somewhere in there. Instead, he found a round room with a chair in the center. He described something odd that happened in this room. As he would step closer to the chair, the room's light would dim and become darker. He would step back away from the chair, and the light in the room would become brighter. I'm not sure what that means, really. It's just a strange detail that he mentions. He found buttons on the arm of the chair, and he found himself desperately pushing them, trying to open the doors. This was unsuccessful. Nothing happened when he pushed them physically, but there was a screen in front of him with lines on it, and every time he pushed a button, the lines would move around. Travis got up out of the chair and started studying the room, trying to find a solution to this problem, trying to find a way out.
Suddenly, a man walked in, and to his surprise, it was a human man, about 6 feet tall, 200 pounds, and muscular. Travis was extremely relieved, thinking that someone was there who could rescue him. The man was wearing blue coveralls and had longer hair. Of course, at this point, Travis ran straight up to him with a long list of desperate questions. But the man said nothing. He indicated for Travis to follow him, and Travis was so relieved to see another human that he went right along with him. They went through a door, and suddenly Travis could find his breath as they entered another room. A much, much bigger room. The air was better, cleaner, less thin, and Travis finally felt like he could breathe. The man seemed to be in a hurry. Travis followed, keeping up with the man through his extreme weakness.
Later, when Travis describes this man, it kind of makes me think of is it the Nordics, they call them, the aliens? Where they're tall and blonde hair, blue eyes. Mm-hmm. That's what he describes them. I never describe him or talk about this later on in it, but that's what he makes me think of. Travis was questioning the man the whole time that he followed him, but the man didn't answer. He noticed that this man was wearing some kind of clear helmet that appeared to be frosted on the backside. He remembered that the creatures he saw weren't wearing these. Due to this helmet, Travis kind of figured that the man just couldn't hear his questions. Soon, they came to a room with 3 other people who also appeared to be human. They all had sandy blonde hair and looked incredibly similar. They weren't wearing helmets, so Travis repeated his questions to them. They didn't answer either. At this point, Travis became upset and combative, and he was forced down onto another table, and some kind of drug was administered to him through a mask with a black golf ball-sized sphere attached to it. He felt relaxed. He got the impression that they were getting impatient with him. His mind was racing. He found himself wondering if these creatures that took him had created these human-looking beings in order to make abducted humans feel more relaxed. He wondered if he had been tricked. Everything went black.
When he woke, he felt a cold breeze and remembered seeing a pretty bright light and the bottom of the metal ship rising up into the sky as he lay in the prone position on the highway. He remembers thinking, being so close to it, you would think an aircraft would be loud, but it was incredibly silent as it flew away into the night sky. He ran 6 miles into town. He met no cars and knocked on the door of a service station where no one answered. Then he saw the familiar Exxon station and a row of phone booths. The first phone he tried was out of order. He moved to the next and heard the familiar and comforting dial tone. He called the operator to dial his sister, and she heard such a panic in his voice that she actually stayed on the line during his conversation with his brother-in-law, who had actually answered the call.
Now, to be clear with that, it wasn't his...
The operator stayed on the line.
Yeah, the operator, not the sister. Okay, so Travis's brother-in-law actually thought it was a joke at first, telling Travis, "I think you have the wrong number," kind of laughing. While Travis yelled frantically, "They brought me back. It's me. Come pick me up." The brother-in-law eventually realized that this was not a joke and told Travis not to move and he would be right there. The operator was still on the line and hearing all of this conversation. She proceeded to call the sheriff's office directly. This would work in favor of Travis later on. Officers would later go to the phone booth to dust for fingerprints later that night in case a crime had occurred.
Does this sound a little excessive? The operator stays on the phone to hear a deranged-sounding man telling his confused friend that he had been abducted by alien entities while he was out in the woods. I'm sure an operator back then heard all kinds of crazy stuff, and this probably wasn't even the weirdest. But here's the really crazy thing. I'm guessing that the reason that she called the cops about this particular crazy phone call is because she heard him say his name was Travis Walton. And by now, word had spread throughout the small town about what had happened to him that night at the woods, because remember, there were 6 other guys out there with him who saw the whole thing. Pretty soon, Travis was in the truck driving home with his brother and his brother-in-law talking about what he thought were events of the same night. Pretty soon, his brother interrupted him and says, "Travis, reach up and feel your face." Travis did. As he ran his hand over the bottom of his face, he realized that in place of his previously clean-shaven face that he'd remembered, there was now a bit of a beard. Here's the real kicker. What had seemed like a few hours on that ship to Travis had actually turned out to be 5 days. Travis had been gone for 5 days.
This had a lot to do with why Travis's brother decided to take him home right away instead of immediately calling the sheriff to let him know that Travis had been found. This was going to be a frenzy of media, cops, detectives, UFO people, and so on. He thought that it would be easier to fend people off from home and protect Travis while trying to figure out what happened to him. Plus, he also mentions later that Travis was kind of in no state of mind for that. He wanted to allow him to kind of collect himself.
Travis's brother had gotten a few warnings from people about what might happen if Travis came back from this event. And these warnings were scary. Some UFO ground watch people came to warn him, and also a nurse that stated that an elderly couple had come into the hospital in which she worked, stating that they had been abducted by a UFO. The next day when she came back to work, no one would talk about it, the couple's records were gone, and people were basically trying to act like the couple had never come in at all. She told Travis's brother to be careful who gets a hold of him. Another phone call came in from a retired CIA agent with the similar warning.
So, while Travis is gone, people have already heard the story that he'd been abducted by a UFO from the witnesses. So people have been calling his family, saying all these scary things. So when they finally find him, they don't really want to turn him over right away until they get it figured out who they can trust. I don't blame them. By the time that Travis had returned to town and let everybody know that he was alive, this thing was already worldwide news. One quiet night, 6 loggers come down off the mountain emotionally wrecked. They're talking about their coworker had gone walking up to a spaceship and was presumably killed when a bright beam of light emerged, shocking him and throwing him lifelessly into the trees. Although law enforcement seemed to be reassuring to the men, and some of them took the men on their word, many of the officers didn't believe them. A big search was organized to go up into the area to bring Travis back. This search included men on horseback, people walking the ground and through the trees, and various helicopters crisscrossing the area. But lo and behold, Travis wasn't there. The 6 witnesses hadn't seen Travis go into the ship, so they were baffled too. He should have still been there.
Now, one man telling some crazy and unbelievable story about how his friend was killed in the woods is one thing. But 6 men, all insisting on the same exact crazy and unbelievable scenario in which a man was killed by a UFO light beam. That sounds like a collaboration. Police were very suspicious of this, and they didn't really believe that this is what happened at all. And really, who could blame them? The police and the townspeople thinking that it was more likely that a fight broke out among the 6 loggers or among Travis and another, that Travis had been killed in the midst of a heated argument. A scenario like that seemed much more reasonable. Now, they just needed to get at least one of the men to crack and tell the real story of how things went down and where Travis really was. In the 5 days since Travis had initially gone missing, all 6 of these men were being held under suspicion of murder.
So this is a big deal.
It is a big deal.
And think about it. There are some cops that did believe it, but I mean, if you were a police officer, that's where my mind would go to. Something happened, whether it was an accident or not, they ended up hiding the body and coming up with some crazy story as to what happened to him.
I mean, that's really reaching, though. That story...
Yeah, I know. Anyway, during the 5-day stretch, the men were separated. Questioning ensued immediately, and each man had a detective trying to get him to give up the real story. The authorities fully believed that something had taken place out there since Travis was missing, and it was completely obvious from the state that these men were in mentally. It sounds like one of the initial things that had been done in order to reach some sort of truth was a lie detector test. Each of the 6 men took one. In an early interview with Travis's co-worker and boss, Mike Rogers, he states that they were all completely willing to do this, and even volunteered to be put under hypnosis or to be administered sodium pentothal or truth serum. They all claimed that they had nothing to hide. A professional who specialized in the field of polygraph administration was brought in, and it is stated that the utmost care was used in testing these men. Mike stated that they were all very angry about being openly accused of murder.
You're listening to the Prescribed Films Podcast Network, home to hundreds of hours of free podcast entertainment. The shows on this network all have a common goal, providing you with the best discussions about movies and other forms of entertainment media. The PFPN hopes to fill your earholes with audio joy. Visit our website with links to all the other amazing shows at www.thepfpn.com. Thanks for listening.
In the interview with Travis Walton on Hannibal TV, he states that Dale was among the first to go.
Was among the first to take the polygraph.
The line of questioning was really hard because a lot of the questions were kind of along the lines of, have you ever wanted to harm Travis? Well, think about it. These were 7 men who were hard-headed, tough guy loggers spending hours a day doing manual labor with a perfectionist boss. Of course they got into their share of scuffles. All of them. Travis said it himself that he had been in a fight or two with each one of them. The others all had as well among each other. It kind of was just that way. It was bound to happen. So the line of questioning was tough in that aspect because of course at some point they had all been irritated or even angry at Travis for something and maybe had fought with him. That didn't necessarily mean that they wanted to see him killed or wanted to kill him themselves. Dale ended up getting mad, pulling everything off and stomping out. He did come back later, took the test calmly after some time, and passed. There was no question that he believed everything he said about what took place that night. All of the other men had passed the lie detector tests as well, making believers out of both the administrator and the sheriff.
So, on top of that, because even after the lie detectors, there's still a huge amount of skeptics. But what are the odds that all 6 men would take lie detector tests and pass them?
And when it was so spontaneous, it's not like they had time to prepare for a polygraph.
Exactly. So we kind of talk about that later.
And unlike a lot of these other stories like this, none of them were trained operatives.
So regarding that, the president of the American Polygraph Administration, Edward Gelb, was interviewed in 1975 to obtain an expert opinion on how likely it would be that these guys could have all passed these tests and actually have made up the whole thing. He states the following.
Hundreds of police departments and corporations throughout the world utilize the polygraph to separate truth from deception. The 94% accuracy of the polygraph has been well documented, not only in real-life situations as we've discussed here, but in laboratory and university studies that have been conducted throughout the world. The odds against 6 people successfully deceiving a trained polygraph examiner on a single issue are over 1,000,000 to 1.
Travis had a couple of brothers, one of which did not believe what the crew was saying. He thought for sure that the men had killed his brother and confronted them about it a few times. Travis's older brother, along with the boy's mother, believed what the crew had to say, although they were horrified of the story. The people in town who actually knew Travis, along with his close friends, all knew him to be a pretty serious and pretty honest guy. They didn't doubt his story. The sheriff didn't let on that he believed the crew, but secretly thought that they may be telling the truth. As an elected official, he had to keep himself out of the weird spotlight. But these officers had already had a few sightings themselves and had been investigating a few cattle mutilations around the area. So this story seemed a little outrageous to them, but not completely unbelievable.
Over the years, obviously, there's been a ton of skepticism over this event. There's been a pretty good amount of people who believe that since Mike and the crew had been behind on the logging contract, meaning that they weren't as far along as they should have been for the span of time that they had to finish it, the crew made the whole thing up to make it easier for Mike to default without big repercussions. But according to Travis, it wasn't really that hard to get out of logging contracts. All you really have to do is go in and tell them that they weren't going to be able to do it, and they would simply find another crew.
Another theory is that Travis and the crew had been drunk or on some sort of drug that caused them to hallucinate the entire thing. Luckily, the police had the forethought to put Travis through all of this testing very soon after he'd been found. He tested negative for any substances. I guess I don't even really see this being a plausible theory, because even if the men had all been drunk or on drugs, I would highly, highly doubt that all 7 men hallucinated the exact same thing and then went home and were all willing to keep telling the exact same story without at least one of them admitting to it and saying, yeah, hey, you're right. We did shrooms and ended up in the hills and things got a little out of hand. We're sorry. I mean, that would make a lot more sense, right? With all of the commotion and murder accusations being thrown around, I just don't believe that all of these guys would keep up the UFO story if that wasn't what happened. All of them told the same story, and all of them kept telling the same story, adamantly.
And for the record, even to this day, none of them have changed their story. They all adamantly claim that this is what happened and that's it. Yet another theory is that Travis simply snapped and went crazy, hallucinating the entire abduction incident. Luckily again, for the forethought of the police, he was put under a battery of psychological tests soon after returning from the mountain as well. And these came back stating that they didn't find any psychological abnormalities in Travis other than the fact that he had obviously just gone through something pretty traumatic. Also again, all 7 men in that truck on the mountain that night would have had to hallucinate the exact same thing. To me, that sounds like an even more outlandish story than the UFO story.
Another theory is one in which there was a shift in the tectonic plates of the Earth, and they happened to have broken open in this area, causing light to shoot up into the sky. And maybe this could explain the light. But what about the ship that they all saw? And then the events that followed that they had all corroborated? This theory doesn't explain any of that.
Also, I meant to look up the scientific version of that, I guess, because I don't know what would cause light to shoot up into the sky if a tectonic plate moved.
Liquid hot magma.
Is that it, really?
No, I have no idea. I've never heard of
I don't know.
Light from an earthquake.
Apparently that's a thing. Well, I don't know. If any of y'all know about this,
call us.
Let us know. Let us know on our voicemail or just
email.
post us on Facebook, whatevs.
do it.
We had mentioned that Travis was put through an extensive psychological examination as well as drug testing. He also had upper body x-rays and EKG and EEG and various blood tests to check him out physically. He also took a polygraph as well for the police detectives. He passed right along with all of his crewmates. So it sounds like they were ready for all of this. As soon as he got back, they did everything to either prove or disprove his story. These police were on it. They were on the ball.
Something else that we found incredibly interesting about this case is this. The trees in the area had always been studied, mostly rate of growth. In the years following the abduction of Travis Walton, it was noted that the trees would have been exposed to supposed UFO radiation in the clearing where the UFO had been. These trees' rate of growth more than doubled in the following years. And only these trees. That would be an interesting but somewhat unremarkable in itself if it weren't for another fun fact. The trees that grew around the site of the nuclear disaster at Chernobyl were close to the same kind of trees, and the same dramatically increased rate of growth was found in these trees as well after their exposure to nuclear radiation.
Now, it has been speculated for a very long time that UFOs give off nuclear radiation because so many people become very ill after having reported a UFO abduction or being close to a UFO, and the symptoms are very similar. So, having these similarities in the tree growth as well is a little bit fascinating to us, and it seems to at least prove that something radioactive was at least present in the woods that night, and shouldn't have been. This little bit of information just seems to lend a smidge more credibility to Travis and the crew's story.
I also have never heard of significant radioactive output from a fault shift.
No, nothing like that.
Men of science, call us and explain this to us.
The rate of growth problem. What is that about? I really meant to look these things up, but I didn't get it done.
While we're on the topic of nuclear radiation related to UFO exposure, you often hear of people who develop cancer after being exposed to nuclear radiation, or really radiation in general. Kenny, the man who was sitting in the front seat next to Travis, scooted over to open the door of the truck after Travis jumped out to get a more direct view of what was going on. So he was the only crew member sitting completely exposed on one side of his body with the door being wide open. Kenny later developed multiple skin cancer lesions on his right arm. Obviously, this isn't definitively explained as being from radiation, but it is odd, and it is worth mentioning.
Travis really wasn't in any hurry to speak to the media directly after the incident, mostly because their questions and reporting were largely skeptical and made him out to be a liar. So he just kind of kept quiet. But he soon realized that keeping quiet was causing them to just fabricate things and fill in the blank spaces of the events the way they wanted, and seemed to be making it worse. And this is why he decided to be more public about his abduction. That way, he could tell the story the way it happened, and people could pretty much take it or leave it. But at least the actual story was getting out instead of a bunch of things that didn't happen.
Between Travis and all of the crew members, over time and for various reasons, approximately 20 polygraph tests have been taken and passed in relation to this incident.
Travis eventually went on to work at the local paper mill and became somewhat of a self-admitted workaholic. Like we talked about earlier, he also wrote a book about his encounter called Fire in the Sky. And I have to say myself, it is a great description. The book went on to become a movie by the same title, and it was pretty popular back in the 90s. Even with all of the notoriety that this event has gained him, Travis still states that he wishes it would have never happened, and that his life had just stayed quiet. When he talks about the attention that he received out of this, he will often say things like, "You've just got to learn to deal with it." He has never sought an interview with anyone. But he has learned that turning down an interview can sometimes have a negative effect. So he will often just do them so that the story is told accurately.
In somewhat recent years, one of the crew members who witnessed the abduction, Steve Pierce, who was only 17 when the abduction happened, did an interview with Open Minds TV that can be found on YouTube, in which he talks about some of the lasting effects that he has experienced since this incident.
I can't sleep at night. I stress all the time. I'm scared of the woods. I cannot sleep in the woods by myself. In my family, they do not believe me. And that's what really hurts the most. My ex-wife used to tell me not to tell nobody because they thought I was nuts. You know, you can't don't be going to somebody's house and telling them the story because it's embarrassing. They think you're nuts. You know, I don't even believe she really believed the story.
He passed the polygraph test along with everyone else, and the continued skepticism and being called a liar had a profound effect on him. He spent a lot of his life avoiding the subject and putting some distance between himself and the experience. He even started going by his first name, Jeff, instead of using his middle name, Steve, as he had his entire life. He states in the interview that he was laughed at a lot because most of the people just thought that the entire thing was a hoax. Philip Glass tried for years to get Steve to admit to this supposed hoax, even offering him $10,000 at one time to just admit it wasn't true. He never took that money. He has maintained his story since the incident happened. And keep in mind that these men didn't make money off of this incident. They didn't seek interviews. Even Travis Walton, who's the subject of the Fire in the Sky movie, he was asked in one interview if he made a lot of money off of it, and he states that it's probably about $15 a year is the royalties from this movie. So it's not a fortune. In 1975, $10,000 was a whole lot of money. If you were wondering, I didn't specify, Philip Glass is an American journalist, and he's a UFO skeptic. And he has basically hounded these men in the years following to get any one of them to admit that this wasn't true, and not one of them have done that.
Thankfully, Travis didn't seem to experience any long-term problems from this incident. He reports having had some mild stress and lack of sleep for quite some time after this happened to him, but nothing long-term, and he has been relatively healthy ever since. He denies any PTSD or debilitating issues and states that the incident itself was traumatic enough, but the reaction that he got through the years just dealing with people was even worse. He does still report some nightmares, and people will tell him that once in a while he can be heard yelling in his sleep as though he is fighting with someone or something. But he didn't have any cancer or anything?
Nope.
You would think him of all people after the lightning thing.
Yeah, but it kind of made me think, this is never said in any interviews or really even speculated that I could find, but I wondered, the men said that they saw him thrown across the clearing so hard that they thought he was dead. So you would think he would have at least a broken bone or something.
Do you think they fixed him?
Yeah. It kind of makes me wonder if that's why he didn't get cancer. Maybe they were healing him or something happened. I don't know. You hear of that a lot, but that's never said in there. Travis doesn't remember most of the 5 days that he was up there, so who knows what happened. Even after what he went through, he kind of defends these beings that put him through so much in a way. He was asked in a few different interviews what he thought the aliens were up to, what their agenda was. He said that he didn't really know, but whatever it is, he didn't think that they meant us any harm. He doesn't think that they are malevolent. The fear that he experienced out of what happened to him was mostly just because of the way it went down. Of course it was scary. But in hindsight, he can see that they really didn't harm him and seem to have done everything they could to try to calm him down and make the experience as easy on him as they could. Although he does think that there is a connection between these entities and our government of some kind, but he doesn't really claim to be an expert on that or have any idea what that connection is or to what extent they're involved.
A lot of people who report UFO abductions or experiences report that it didn't only happen one time, but would occur over and over again multiple times throughout their lives. In an interview with Mysterious America, Travis was asked if he had ever experienced another abduction or if he had prior to the one on the mountain that was witnessed by several others. Travis replied to the interviewer simply, "I wouldn't tell anyone if I did. I have had enough trouble with what happened."
By trouble, we're assuming that Travis meant the years and years of harassment that it seems that all of these men have gone through in the years since the incident. The men report that they get periodic visits and phone calls from people who claim to be members of the FBI, in which they're threatened and asked to redact their stories and claim them as a hoax. That is part of the reason why Travis thinks that there is some level of involvement between the aliens and the U.S. government.
He did undergo hypnosis sometime after the abduction occurred. He hadn't done so sooner because he felt like he could remember most of what happened. It really wasn't a situation in which there were a lot of blank spots, he thought. But then again, he was gone for 5 days, while he hadn't felt like it had been all that long. In this hypnotic regression, he was able to talk about what had happened in a more calm and collected manner. He stated in an interview that the hypnotist had helped him separate the memories that he had from the intense fear reaction that would present upon recounting them. With that, he was able to tell the story and recall several things that he hadn't been able to. But there were still big blocks of memory that he wasn't able to access, and the hypnotherapist determined that taking the session further and uncovering these memories might end up being extremely detrimental to Travis. So Travis agreed that he would be fine just leaving them alone and going on with his life. And that's exactly what he has done. He feels like if those memories are blocked, there's probably a good reason, and that's good enough for him.
We just want to make sure that we throw out there that we did not interview Travis ourselves, and that this episode was created with information derived from many interviews that Travis has graciously granted over the years. We tried to use information that came directly from him, for the most part, as well as information found on www.traviswalton.com for the most credible information possible. We know that he cares very much about the story being told accurately, as there are a lot of embellishments out there. And here at Bigfoot for Breakfast, we have done our best to do so. We respect this very much and hope that we did this interesting story justice.
We are definitely not interested in embellishing or
making up details.
Sensationalizing.
We really
things.
Don't need to in this story.
The story in its own is pretty freaking sensational.
It is insane.
Welp. Oh, thank you for listening this week to our show, and we really hope that you'll be back next week for another weird and creepy story. We appreciate every single one of you and all of your encouraging feedback. We love doing this show and love you guys. If you haven't done so, please don't forget to subscribe to our show on whichever podcast app that you listen to. If you get a few minutes, please rate and review us on these apps as well, because this really, really helps out our show. And like we said before, we appreciate any feedback that we receive tremendously. If you want to leave us a voicemail, you can do so at 641-812-2635. You can email us at bigfootforbreakfast@outlook.com, or you can contact us via Facebook. Add us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok for other information and content. Again, don't forget to come back next week. We have a pretty crazy story gracing the lineup.
Bye.
Bye.
Come at me, bro.